Hello world! It's 40 years ago, last weekend, 13th of July 1985, that Bob Geldof staged this massive concert called Live Aid. It was a live experience. It was a live follow-up to the Band Aid record, Do They Know It's Christmas, that had been recorded and released at the end of 1984. Which had shown that the public was desperate to help the famine in Ethiopia. And jollied along by that, Bob Geldof decided to put on Band Aid, which was earmarked, as I say, for 13th of July 1985. Now, there are some documentaries which I've been imbibing myself with on the BBC iPlayer, if you live in the UK or can VPN it so that you can get it. Live Aid 40 years on. There's a 3-part series. The first part deals with the record. I also made a video in the Song and the Story, which I'll put a link to down there. My experiences of the Band Aid Do They Know It's Christmas record, my memories of it. The second part deals with the concert itself, Live Aid, and the third part deals with Live 8, which was a 20-year rinse and repeat. Really. It was, as I say, a major technological achievement. But there's a kind of flip side to that coin, really. And that is that at home, most people have mono television sets. So they wouldn't be able to hear it in stereo. The sound would really be pretty low quality, really. FM stereo had become a mainstream thing. I mean, the first FM stereo broadcasts were in the late 50s, but it took a great big sort of push and shove, really, to get FM stereo accepted and enjoyed in people's homes. Most people either had tinny little radio cassettes with one speaker or just something tiny for a radio to listen to. But with the advent of the music centre, more and more radios were becoming stereo. But Radio 1, who were going to be broadcasting Live Aid, had to share an FM slot with Radio 2. Most of the time, the content on the FM waveband was hogged by Radio 2, apart from Sunday nights where we used to get the charts and we used to get Annie Nightingale afterwards and stuff, and then it would go back to Radio 2 by Monday morning. But for Live Aid Day, Radio 1 were allowed the FM band to broadcast Live Aid. And therefore, if you wanted Live Aid in stereo and you wanted to watch it at the same time, you had to have your stereo radio close enough to your TV set so that you could put its speakers either side of the television and turn the TV down so that the TV sound didn't interfere with the radio sound, whatever, and sort of muck up your stereo placement. And then you could enjoy it in stereo. And I just think that things like that, really, technology in the 80s, it was so there, so close and so nearly there that they could manage this great behemoth that no one had ever done before, broadcasting this concert all around the world from 2 cities, either side of the Atlantic. But we were still listening on tinny little speakers, and if we wanted it in stereo, we had to place our stereo speakers either side of the telly and listen on the radio. That was stereo. I'm going to make a video about the evolution of stereo television, hopefully this month. But the Live Aid channel on YouTube on Sunday streamed about 10 hours worth of the gig in different parts. 10 parts, I think there were. I hopped in at part 4. It's just that when I switched on YouTube on Sunday, I thought, oh, they're streaming Live Aid. Live, it's a live stream. So it was broadcasting part 4 as I was, you know, when I first switched into it, so it wasn't a deliberate thing. But anyway, I found a photo of the set list that have been posted on Facebook. So I'm just going to go through and just say some of my favourites and some of my worsts from this gig. Okay, so the opening ceremony, then we have Status Quo, not my favourite band ever, not my cup of char, but they were okay, alright. The Style Council, brilliant, loved the Style Council. Ultravox, okay. Midure, who co-wrote Do They Know It's Christmas, is an absolute musical genius. Their singles in the 80s I enjoyed, but their albums I think were a bit much for me. We have the Boomtown Rats and Adamant. Well, obviously Bob Geldof's How to Die is absolutely legendary. A brilliant performance. He did look like he hadn't slept for several days. But yeah, absolutely legendary performance. Adamant, I can't remember, he hasn't allowed his Live Aid performance to ever be shown on commercial material since that day. He's been very crummy about it. I think he performed Apollo 9. There are lots of acts here that this was the bit where after their performance at Live Aid their careers took a tumble. That could certainly be the case with Adamant, although he was already on the way down in terms of popularity. He hadn't done anything throughout 1984, for instance. 1984, such a key year for 80s pop music. I mean, if you like the 80s, just grab a whole ton of stuff that was released in 1984. It's a brilliant year. But Adamant had nothing out in it. I found it a little bit much that he was at the end during Feed the World, that he was trying to hog the microphone and he was coming in and Feed the World, and you know, he was obviously, you know, afterwards he was so disingenuous about it that it just seems a bit hypocritical of him to be sort of appearing to be so into it on the day. And I liked Adam. I went to see Adam. He was one of my idols, but I was disappointed in him after that. Really quite disappointed. So then we have Spandau. Spandau happened to be one of the best performances, I think, of Live Aid. If you were going to say the difference between Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, even though I was, an avid Duran Duran fan, collected all their albums and stuff and have absolutely that much Spandau Ballet in my record collection, I would go for that Spandau Ballet performance the whole time. It was absolutely on the money. And I think the musician that I really noticed when I watched it recently was Steve Norman on his saxophone. He was absolutely, on fire that day. An absolutely brilliant performance there. Elvis Costello, Nick Kershaw, absolutely loved Nick Kershaw's performance at Live Aid, watched it over and over and over. But for him, that was, as I say, his career was on a high. He got a few singles off of his second album, The Riddle. And then after that, he kind of went like that. And he wasn't really seen again till another album. I think it was Radio Musicola in 1986, which bombed. And that was his career until he wrote that song for Chesney Hawkes. Sade, brilliant. I like Sade. I don't like Sade. Sade's singles are brilliant. That Diamond Life LP has got some absolutely gorgeous moments on it, but anything that isn't a single on there, I just find so unmemorable. Any slower, it'll go backwards, a bit yuppie-ish, but in terms of her and her performance, brilliant. We have Sting, Phil Collins and Julian Lennon. at 3:18 p.m. UK time. Yeah, Phil Collins was going off on his helicopter. Quick word about that, because somebody in the comments when I was watching the live stream was saying, oh, they're expecting the poor people to put their hands in their pockets and raise money while they're all flying around on helicopters and Concords and what have you. And I think it bears repeating here that everybody gave their services for free, whether they were stagehands, whether or not they were selling tickets, whether or not they were the venues themselves not actually charging to put the concert on, you know, no rent or anything like that. It was all done as a freebie. The helicopters, the Concords, everything else like that, that was all donations. Those were huge donations that people made. And yeah, you know, you and I donated a £5. £5 a lot of money in those days, by the way. Yeah, I'm going to actually have a little pause there, because the price of the ticket to go and see Live Aid was £25, of which £5 was the price of the ticket and £20 was a mandatory donation. If you wanted to go and see Live Aid, you had to donate 20 quid. £5 was the price of the ticket. Now, that doesn't sound like very much money, except that a few years later, around about 1989-ish, when I first moved out of home to be nearer my college, my rent for a room was £25 a week. Food for one person, maybe £10 or £15, maybe £20 a week. What Live Aid were asking you to do was basically give up a week of food for the donation and £5 for the ticket price. Put that into perspective. ABBA in 1979 at Wembley, £6.50, £7.50, £8.50 tickets. And you weren't making a donation to famine relief. Queen at Wembley the year before, 1978, £4.25 for a ticket. So yeah, that's kind of putting it into perspective. I don't remember Julian Lennon at all from there. This is not coming into, as yet, the bit that I saw on Sunday. Howard Jones, brilliant performance. I hope you find it in everything you see. What was that song? There was a time when there was nothing at all, nothing. Whatever. Lovely song, brilliant performance. But again, you know, he had this Dream Into Action LP that was on the boil at the time, making him lots of money. But again, after 1985, phew, dumper bound. I don't even think he had a comeback. He is still performing, but you know, in terms of, you know, even a comeback one-off single, I don't think he's had that has, you know, sort of taken, you know, where the world's taken any notice of him. Brian Ferry, 4:07 in the afternoon. Don't remember very much about that. 4:38, Paul Young and Alison Moyet. And this is where I came in, switched on part 4 and started watching. Again, I'd seen the Paul Young bit sort of quite recently in its own little clip on YouTube. So I was quite familiar with it, but what a band. What a band. And I really wanted to sort of give a shout out there to the backing singers for him. Absolutely amazing. Alison Moyet and Paul Young duet, they're fantastic. You know, Alison Moyet was, again, she was another one who was riding high at the time. I'm not going to say she was dumper bound. I don't think she was after that. I think she sort of had a couple more years left in her. Don't really know very much about her career, but you know, whenever you hear an Alison Moyet record, you just think, oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Paul Young, in terms of his chart career, I don't think he was very much, he had very much life left in him either. So as I say, you know, this Live Aid concert was either, yes, our careers went woohoo, or no, our careers kind of slid down. We had Bryan Adams at 5 p.m. live from America. They didn't show that on the YouTube stream. U2, though, they certainly did. And yeah, that was brilliant. I think because Bono, I have a lot of time for Bono and his opinions and that sort of thing. He seems like a really good bloke. I don't really have a huge amount of time for U2 as a band. I think I've got the Joshua Tree somewhere. I haven't played it for absolutely ages. Maybe I ought to. I think it's really lack of knowledge, really. I don't really know very much about it. But, you know, I don't really feel absolutely that inclined to. But what a performance anyway. You know, I think they had to cut a number because of him going down into the audience, and I think that was a bit bravado, and why on earth did you do that? Because surely to God, there's a girl struggling in the audience and stewards are trying to get her out because she's obviously being crushed. They've spotted her at the front, whatever, and they need to get her out, and Bono goes down there. So what's that going to do, Bono? That's just going to make more and more people push their way to the front and squash this girl even more. Poor thing, you know, she got a hug off Bono for it, but then so did a load of other people that had managed to jump the barrier and get up onto that little ledge in front of the stage, and he had to hug a few more people, and the band to keep playing this sort of vamping thing of the song over and over and over again. And I think yeah, they had to cut out, I think it was Pride in the Name of Love that they had to cut out because of that. Now, the Beach Boys live from America. Okay, I think the Beach Boys in the studio, supervised and absolutely to the nth note by Brian Wilson, is a lot better than hearing them live on stage. You don't really want to hear them sort of crank it out live on stage. It's the records that are the real beautiful things. But yeah, we've got them there. And R.I.P. Brian, you know, we lost you very recently. So yeah, R.I.P. Dire Straits at 6 p.m. I've heard that performance so many times now. I can remember, you know, back in the day, you know, from people who videoed it, having to watch that performance over and over again. And I have to say, I hated it. I hated it. That album, Brothers in Arms to Me by Dire Straits, was just, I found, so tedious and so self-indulgent. I don't think Mark Knopfler's got a good singing voice. It's a bit gravelly and whatever. It was music for people who don't like music, who thought that they were a bit better than the Nick Kershaws and Howard Joneses that were sort of currently doing the rounds. And, you know, oh yeah, I like the Straits, man. Like, go away. I've got a CD player, yeah. And no, didn't really like it, but I can see why people would. Mark Knopfler has done some brilliant work, it has to be said, on Joan Armatrading. So you can see that where I've got criticisms for some of these people, I can still see that there's a positive side to them as well. I'm not being entirely disingenuous to them. Tears for Fears are on this set list. So it was obvious that they were expected to show up. They were due to play from America at 6:21 p.m. and they didn't, because no one had asked them. In the Song and the Story, they don't mention it at all in the documentaries on BBC, on the iPlayer, so don't go looking for it there. But I tell you a little bit about what happened there from my own little research in the Song and the Story that I made about the Do They Know It's Christmas thing. Link down below. Queen. This was a whole ton of people streaming on Sunday were only staying for Queen. It has to be said, I was really disappointed in the streaming figures for this YouTube thing. 3,000 was about average for the afternoon. 4,000 when Queen came on, because everybody knew, they've seen the film, Bohemian Rhapsody, whatever. They know that the Live Aid performance was legendary, and that's how, you know, a whole load of post-80s people will be coming on to Live Aid and will be coming on to Queen because they want to see Queen. And they hadn't got the luxury of this little photograph which I'd found on Facebook. Brilliant performance, by the way. And I have to say that in that film that they made about the life of Queen and Freddie Mercury, in that film they created that Live Aid scene. That was not archival footage from the gig. They actually redid it with the actors that were playing Queen. It wasn't at Wembley, I think it was somewhere in Bedfordshire or something like that that they recreated it, and they did an absolutely fantastic job of it. If you put the two side by side, you'll see. Simple Minds were good. Again, I thought that Simple Minds as a band were a bit overrated. I'm not really all that fond of stadium rock, can you tell? You know, we've got the Straits, we've got U2, that I'm not all that hot on, even though I quite like them, I suppose. If someone put U2 on, I wouldn't tell them to turn it off, put it that way. Then we've got Simple Minds. Again, if someone put Simple Minds on, I wouldn't tell them to turn it off, but I would choose other people over them, put it that way. Bowie, 7:20 p.m, amazing, but he gave up a number because of the Cars. Again, watch the documentary. It's the second part of the BBC documentary, but you know, the story about how that video of the Famine, accompanied by the Cars, Who's Gonna Drive You Home, is told. I have to say that looking at that video now, I am still gutted, still cried when I saw it. Can well understand why people were crying on the day. You know, sometimes you look at pop stars and you think, oh God, they're going over the top there. I remember in a post Live Aid gig, yes, this Live Aid gig sort of did spawn a few copycat things, and one of them was a gig for AIDS in the 90s, and David Bowie got down on one knee and said the Lord's Prayer, and you thought, oh God, how over the top. But there was absolutely no over the topness about seeing that video. That was just terrible. And where we get to who's going to plug your ears when you scream, and you hear this baby crying out that they've mixed in to the track, and I'd forgotten all about that, and that gave me a lump. It sent a shiver even now just telling you about it. Very, very emotional part. And up to then, the donations by telephone have been not as encouraging as they would like to have been, but the donations went up after that. The Pretenders were great. Got a lot of fond memories of the Pretenders from the 80s, second half of the 80s in particular. I think the Pretenders became a bit more popular in the late 80s, having done that gig. Yeah, they've been around since the late 70s and so on, and we've got Brass in Pocket and stuff like that, but you know, the record companies were pushing their current album at that time and their back catalogue as well in the wake of Live Aid. So yeah, they probably benefited from it. The Who, I don't really know very much about The Who. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that terrible? They're a bit too old for me, really. I didn't grow up with them. I didn't grow up with the Beatles either, but I, you know, as an 80s kid, as an 80s teenager, I didn't think that you could actually call yourself a pop fan without knowing anything about the Beatles. But The Who, they just sort of went past me, whatever. I think I saw Quadrophenia the once, and that was about it, really. Santana and Pat Metheny, that wasn't shown, but they were supposed to be on at 8:21 British time in America. 8:40 though, Elton John and Wham, it says there. Oh God, Elton, darling Elton. I mean, you're just fantastic whenever you perform. And yeah, you did Benny and the Jets, and you did Candle in the Wind, whatever, and we loved it. And then, oh God bless him, George Michael. He came on with Andrew Ridgeley, but Andrew Ridgeley kind of slipped away somewhere, and I don't know what he was doing for the rest of his time, whether or not he was on stage sort of playing guitar or whether or not he went off. I think he was there to come on stage in front of those millions of people with George Michael, otherwise he wouldn't have done it. But what a performance of Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. What a performance. Amazing. And it hadn't even been recorded. I mean, now there is an Elton George Michael duet of it, but that was later. That was, I think, this AIDS concert that I was telling you about earlier, where that was performed. This performance, I don't think has been released as a single, and I don't think it's been released anywhere else. This was just George singing it solo, and it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And you look at him and you just think, you know, that he wasn't there because of his ego or because of his career. He was there because he is a jolly good egg. He is, you know, he really is. I mean, he is the sort of person that at Christmas will be going in disguise to homeless groups and sort of handing out Christmas meals on Christmas Day and stuff like that. And, you know that there was a genuine, you know, person. He was the salt of the earth. Really was the salt of the earth. Got treated absolutely appallingly by the press as well. You know, the world, we miss you, George. The Thompson Twins and Nile Rodgers, I think they were edited out. I have seen a performance of that on YouTube somewhere. It may not be officially on the Live Aid channel, but I think someone's uploaded it. It's quite a good performance. I think might have been Hold Me Now that they did, and they did this hugely long 12-inchy version of it. Then at 9:39, it's the Wembley Finale, Mercury and May, Paul McCartney. That was when that was scheduled for. Paul McCartney's microphone famously cut out on him. On the documentary, you can see what it actually sounded like on the day. This version that they were streaming and that's been seen as well in its own little bit on YouTube is an edit. Paul McCartney went back and doctored his vocals. I don't know how many others would have done that, but you think if he did it, you wonder how many others did as well. At that time, we had 3 remaining surviving Beatles, and people were pressuring for a Beatles reunion on stage with Julian Lennon, you know, taking John's place. And none of the Beatles ever wanted to do that. They never wanted to get the Beatles back together and do that because there would always be a space without John. And I think perhaps why we don't have George Harrison, who was quite current. His career was going to enjoy a big resurgence throughout the late 80s with the Travelling Wilburys and his own solo records. We haven't had Got My Mind Set on You yet, but he didn't. I think partly because the Live Aid prototype was 1973. It would have been the concert for Bangladesh, as organised by George Harrison to raise funds and awareness of the situation in Bangladesh. They were, starving, another sort of famine going on there. Ravi Shankar came to George Harrison and said, "Can you please do something for these people?" And he put on this whacking great concert, and all the money got froze, didn't it? Because of all the legal problems with Apple and everything else like that. I think it got released in the end, but by that time it was too little too late. It certainly didn't come at the right time for to help when the help was actually needed. So I think maybe he was a bit scarred by that as well, but certainly having, if George Harrison had had his own solo spot there, then it would be swamping the event, I think, and I don't think anybody wanted to really do that. They didn't want to make it about the Beatles and what have you, and certainly they were never going to perform together without John. The finale, great. The finale, I've said my piece about Adamant making a bit of a twat of himself, trying to push in to the microphone, whatever. So I'm just going to quickly run through. In my mind, the Philadelphia gig, it was not a patch on the London gig, and I think even, you know, the American fans would probably say the same. Certainly for me, my knowledge at the time of American rock stars was minimal. It was limited to what was being played on the radio at the time. So yeah, a lot of these I didn't really know. Tom Petty, though, having heard him a couple of nights ago, I've really got to go and listen to him a bit more. That was actually really good. I really enjoyed that. One act that isn't mentioned on this list, possibly because Tears for Fears were instead, but one particular act was George Thorogood and the Destroyers, who I think, I don't know, I'm just spouting this out of the top of my head, but he may have been the replacement for Tears for Fears. But George Thorogood and the Destroyers was pretty good as well. Kenny Loggins sang Footloose. The Cars, I love the Cars. I love the Cars, particularly the one that's got Best Friend's Girl and stuff on it. Not the one with Drive on it. That's too overly smooth 80s produced, whereas I prefer the rawer production of the late 70s stuff. But yeah, they were really good. Neil Young, at the time, 1985, I didn't know who Neil Young was, but when I came back from a couple of months in America, I bought a copy on CD of Neil Young's Decade, 66 to 76, and really got into him. So seeing him this time, I really enjoyed it, but it floated past me on the day. The Power Station, I don't know whether I've said what I want to say about the Power Station. They sounded like a box of Rice Krispies on steroids and nose candy. Really dreadful, I think. At the time, I quite enjoyed the first Power Station album, the one that's got Robert Palmer as vocalist. We had Michael Des Barres here. I don't know who Michael Des Barres is from A Bar of Chocolate, but yeah, they didn't sound particularly good, and you could see how much of the illegal stuff that they'd been imbibing by that time. No. Eric Clapton, I don't like Eric Clapton. Can you tell? I don't like Eric Clapton. Phil Collins, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. That wasn't shown because Phil Collins had played with Eric Clapton. He played drums with Eric Clapton, and you know, perhaps was a bit of a redeeming thing about it. But Robert Plant and Jimmy Page used Phil Collins as kind of a replacement drummer, and it didn't work very well, and it was edited out of this this thing. Talking of editing out, we have Duran Duran. Duran Duran hadn't played together for about 6 months or so. I don't think they'd even been in a room together since A View to a Kill. It's fair enough. For about 4 years or so, from 1981 onwards, they'd non-stop been in each other's pockets, touring, making records, making videos, touring, making records, and so on. And I think they got to a point they wanted to do these two separate projects, which were the death of them, because we wouldn't see the Duran Duran full lineup until 2000 after that, with the Astronaut album, because Andy Taylor had decided he'd had enough, and we had Simon, Nick and Roger, who made that Arcadia album. And after that, the bickering between those two factions of the band led Roger Taylor to say, look, I'm having a breakdown here. I need some time. Give me some time, whatever. So he then decided that he'd had enough, really. So the Notorious from 1986, which I think is a superb album, a fantastic album, but it's only got Simon, John and Nick on it. And so, yeah, this Live Aid thing was, again, it was a for Duran Duran. And of course, we all know about when they actually performed The View to a Kill at Live Aid, it was appalling. Absolutely appalling. And poor Simon reached up for a top note for A Fatal Kiss Is All We Need, and went, a fatal kiss is all we need. And he's never been allowed to live that down. Obviously, Duran Duran, they're still performing today. The four, John, Nick, Simon and Roger, Andy did tour with them, but then decided that he didn't really like it, and he's also got cancer, bless him, so he's not in a good way at the moment. But yeah, Live Aid was for him, and they've edited out A View to a Kill on that stream, which I think is cheating a little bit. But as I say, if you had to choose Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet that day, I would have chosen Spandau for the actual performance. Madonna, someone told her to take some clothes off or whatever. I don't blame them. For goodness sake, I thought exactly the same thing when I saw her. It was like 35 degrees or something over there at that time. It was an absolute heat wave. You can see people in the audience with, you know, their tops off and everything, and spraying themselves with water and everything. And Madonna's walking in like she's just walked into a blooming blizzard or something, with all her layers and jackets on and everything. And she's dancing around and everything. Now, I know they had aircon on the stage and whatever to keep them cool. You could see a lot of them, you could see their clothes flapping around. So there was obviously some sort of aircon and fans and whatever keeping the temperatures bearable. But yeah, she did make me feel very hot, and she shouted out, I ain't taking shit off. Edited out of the stream, but you can see it if you watch the documentary on BBC on the iPlayer. She sang Love Makes the World Go Round. I'm sure she did. And here I'm going to have a little shout out for, I think his name's Michael Ferreira, one of her dancers. You can see him dancing there. He's got his little World AIDS Day ribbon on his costume, whatever. And he passed away in 1989. That was, you know, probably his swan song, his most amazing thing, you know. And he would have been 30s, something like that. Really, really sad. So yeah, you know, look at a few of those people on there, and we haven't got them anymore. You know, Freddie Mercury, you know, AIDS took him, took this dancer, as I say, you know, really sad. I think they edited Rod Stewart out. I did have I had a little power nap at some stage there, because I woke up again to this horrific performance. This has to be the worst that I saw out of the whole streaming thing. And I have in my record collection a very, very original copy of Laura Nyro and Patti LaBelle, and Patti LaBelle's backing band, LaBelle, as it were. So it's Laura Nyro and LaBelle, basically. And it is absolutely amazing. But that woman's ego and that woman's choice of material upon which to demonstrate that ego, I absolutely hated it. It was absolutely awful. Of the 3 songs that we saw, she massacred all 3 of them. It was awful. I can't stand all that caterwauling and trying to make one note into 3 million. And she sang Imagine, and it was just like, you may say I'm a dreamer. And it was horrible. I'll promise I won't do that again. It was horrible. What was it? Horrible. And then she did the same thing to Forever Young. 2 of the most simple songs ever that have their message in the words, not the music. The music are just nice, simple things to hook quite poignant lyrics on. Joan Baez sang Forever Young beautifully. in the 60s. I think it was Joan Baez who made it famous, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And she just sings it really simply. Patti then went on to massacre Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Just, oh God, do shut up, Patti. Thankfully, Hall & Oates and the Temptations were just amazing together. Had a bit of Mick Jagger. Tina Turner, I could have... it's only rock and roll, but I like it. Yeah, that was a tad repetitive and whatever. Bob Dylan. I was a bit disappointed in Bob Dylan. They only showed, I don't know what his whole set was, but they showed him singing Blowing in the Wind. One of the guitarists, Keith Richards I think it was, took a great big snort of coke from the top of his guitar as he was performing. A string broke and it all just became a bit of a mess. And then we had the finale, which Patti LaBelle absolutely again ruined. Joan Baez, who was there, by the way, she's not mentioned on this set list, but I think she went on as a sort of crowd warmer-upper at Philadelphia. I've never actually seen her performance, but she describes being there in her book and A Voice to Sing With. She sang, you know, nicely on We Are the World. She was a bit sort of in the lead, in the forefront, and then Patti LaBelle just came and just trampled on the whole lot of them. And somebody sarcastically on YouTube, on the feed, wrote, Patti LaBelle's backing singers had better step up. You know, because, oh God, you know, and you're going to hear all the singers, all the, you know, all saying, you know, oh, the amazing talent there and everything, and then they show a bit of Patti LaBelle and say, oh, and she has such a good voice. And no, I don't think so. No, this is becoming a rant to Patti LaBelle. I'm sorry. But anyway, that will do it for now. Live Aid was a fantastic day. Go on to the Live Aid channel on YouTube and have a look there. Also, if you're in the UK, as I say, there's those 3 documentaries on the iPlayer about Live Aid 40 years on. If you carry on scrolling, you will find that there's 2 sections on there as well, which are basically another 5 hours or so of Live Aid, 216 minutes. Do the maths, work it out, 4 or 5 hours worth of Live Aid there. Remember to like, subscribe, share if you dare, and I'll be your best friend forever. I've had a couple of weeks doing not very much, but I'm back here now, and yeah, okay, see you later, bye.